Pauline Kael, she said that she commended the film of its emotional power, the emotional power of the film. And she said that Pontecorvo, she called Pontecorvo was one of the most dangerous types of Marxists. He was a Marxist poet.
Ragazzi, vi si smonta tutto. Il film non si fa più. 2 giorni qua non ci deve essere più niente. Bisogna cominciare subito. Coraggio, al lavoro, buttate giù. Dico bene, autore?
Sì, grazie. Arrivederci, ragazzi. Ci vediamo in un prossimo film.
Lo speriamo.
Ciao, marinai.
Welcome to Cinema Italia, a podcast dedicated to the world of Italian cinema. Presented by me, John Bleasdale. Everybody, welcome to Cinema Italia. This is a new episode and we are relaunching Cinema Italia for 2024. Hopefully this will be an extensive season. I'm aiming for 10 episodes, and today I'm delighted to be talking to Lee Freeman, film academic extraordinaire. And Lee, I saw he was getting Battle of Algiers, I think as part of his Christmas haul, and I just thought that is a film that I am passionate about and I want to talk about, and I thought Lee would be the perfect guest for this episode. So thanks for coming, Lee.
Thanks for having me on. It's a thrill to be talking to you about this. You're right, extraordinarily powerful, visceral piece of cinema. I think it's an important film to look at in consideration of where we are today geopolitically and what's going on in the Middle East and so on. But it's also such a fascinating film to look at in terms of its style and its use of documentary style aesthetics. I think what's really interesting about this film is if you talk about the idea of documentary as being, documentary has always held a privileged position. First of all, it's important to point out that this film is not a documentary. It's not. It's a fictionalized account of real events. Yet it doesn't come across like that. In terms of the what academics call the indexicality of the image and so on, it looks like you're really witnessing history unfold before your eyes. And unlike, say, one of the great documentaries like Gillo Pontecorvo's Man with a Movie Camera from the silent era, a Soviet documentary, which actually shows its own constructedness, its own artifice. You see the film being filmed and you see the film being edited and so on. This does the opposite. Battle of Algiers does exactly the opposite. What it does is it hides its own artifice, and it hides the fact that it's a fictional reconstruction, and it looks really real.
So real, in fact, that I was rewatching it for this interview, for this talk, and I was still going, but that's real footage. That's surely real footage. They didn't do that, I mean, most appallingly, the scenes of actual terrorist sort of atrocities look like, how did they even, did they film this where life was cheap? How did they even do that?
The scenes where they're pulling the bodies out of the rubble and so on just looks like what we're seeing daily on the news now from cars. It looks so real that you're right. You think, how can they do this? In fact, what's interesting is that when the film was on its American release, they added a caption to it to say that not one foot of footage was used of documentary or newsreel footage in the making of the film, because it looks so real, and it still does now. And considering how real it must have looked at the time when people were used to watching these kind of grainy newsreels, it looks so authentic. I think possibly one of the most authentic looking films I've ever seen, I think. Of course, Pontecorvo had an advantage on the Italian neorealists because he could use, with improvements in technology, he could use telephoto lenses, handheld cameras and so on. Rossellini, De Sica and so on didn't have that luxury. But it's so real. But of course, it borrows from the techniques of neorealism. Rossellini, De Sica, Visconti and so on had started. In fact, I would call it. Look at it in terms of a. You won't get this with anyone else, just with me. I'm just going to make it up. A neo-realist film because it came out it was released in 1966, and basically neorealism had kind of finished about a decade or so before that, in the mid-50s. Really, the filmmakers had moved on that, and kind of the Italian neorealist thing was carried on internationally, really by Pontecorvo, but also by things like, well, even the French New Wave and so on, French Nouvelle Vague. They adopted some elements of neorealism. And I would say, actually, that neorealism is one of those. Every now and then you get a cinematic movement that comes around that changes cinema history, how we look at films and how films are made. Italian neorealism is one of those. That's its influence on the new Hollywood.
Yeah, or Dogma with Feston in the late 80s, I'm guessing, or early 90s. Yeah, I mean, just to talk for a second about the context and the sort of background of the film. Gillo Pontecorvo is an Italian coming from a secularized Jewish family. He's not a practicing Jewish family. He's been brought up, leaves for France, Paris before the Second World War breaks out, so that he's basically to avoid the growing anti-Semitism, returns to Italy and becomes a partisan, and becomes quite a prominent partisan, actually a leader in the partisans in Milan. So an active member of the Communist Party also until the 50s. And like many people who joined the Communist Party for idealistic reasons, he was appalled by Russia's crushing of the Hungarian rebellion and left. And so he later in life would sort of cast himself as much more of a man of the left. I think in a Guardian interview, he once characterized himself as. His approach to cinema, as you rightly pointed out, was very deeply influenced by the neorealists. His sort of first idea that, although he had tinkered with film in Paris, his first real sort of moment of Damascene revelation was on watching Rossellini's Paisan. And so he had made some films before Battle of Algiers. He'd made a film, one of the earliest films about the Holocaust, Capo. In fact, a controversial film at the time for its depiction of what was happening in the concentration camps and the death camps.
Yeah, that controversy has all kind of been reduced to one single kind of tracking shot as well, hasn't it? I think the criticism of that film, I think, is based on two things. One, tracking shot, which seems a little ridiculous to me, actually. But, was it Jack Rivette who criticised the tracking shot originally when one of the prisoners electrocutes herself on the fence? And also the melodrama in the set, which I think I have more in agreement with. I think it does become a little overly melodramatic in the last act. I still think it's an incredibly powerful film, and I was devastated when I saw it. It's not quite as good as Battle of Algiers, sorry.
Yeah, but I mean, that's so, the bar is so high with that. I mean, it's like, so when he goes and he's making Battle of Algiers, this is very close to history. I mean, it's not even, I mean, he's making a film about events that took place only a few years preceding, correct?
Yeah. Yes, that's right. I mean, one of the producers, Sadi Youssef, was actually a fighter for the Algerian Liberation Army, the FLN, and it was his idea to make the film. I think we need to point out that it's an Italian-Algerian co-production as well, and to acknowledge the Algerian contribution to the film. Youssef had fought for the FLN and had an idea for a script because he too was. He approached Visconti first, I believe, who turned it down, and then Pontecorvo. Now, Pontecorvo turned the film down because he thought it was too pro-FLN. It was just almost like a hagiography of the FLN. There was no critique of the FLN at all. But Pontecorvo at that time was working on a film set in Algiers called Para, which was about the paratroopers, which was going to star Paul Newman. And he showed this script to Youssef, and Youssef turned it down, said that film will have absolutely no credibility with people in Algeria whatsoever. you tell me Paul Newman's going to star in it, you might as well get John Wayne to star in it as much credibility as it's got. So what Pontecorvo did is he took the memoirs of Yassif written in prison when he was imprisoned by the French and used that for the script and combined it with elements of his parafilm with the paratroopers when they arrive in Algiers and later on in the film. And Yassif really liked that, so they got together and they made this film. And you're right, it was made only like, let's say, close to the historical events that it was portraying. But also, I think it's important to think how it also fed into the anti-colonialist kind of arguments that would come from the New Left and so on in the late 60s. And also, of course, it's hard not to read comments about the Vietnam War that was going on at its height at this time.
Well, the Vietnam War is actually name-checked because Matthias, the head of the Paras who comes in, is a veteran. And also, linking to maybe a comment on Pontecorvo's own war experience, he's also an ex-partisan. He's an ex-member of the resistance, French partisan.
He says at one point something along the lines of that, they call us fascists, but some of us fought against fascism. Without being too controversial, it's a similar sort of argument that's used with Israel and so on, isn't it? That we've suffered, so we cannot be fascists or we cannot be oppressors.
Yeah, that sort of our own historical legacy of oppression gives us sort of immunity, which was most recently one of the ministers of the Israeli government referred to South Africa's bringing of the war crimes accusation as being a blood libel, which I thought was the way that phrase was used, the historical resonance that phrase has, was controversial to say the very least. I mean, I don't think we need to shy away too much from contemporary resonance because this film is entirely built to excite those arguments, and I think the film is subtle enough that it isn't. I don't think it's propaganda. I don't think it's just simply, a rah for the FLN.
No, it isn't. It's pro-resistance. It's pro-revolution, and yet it critiques and it actually shows you the human cost of the FLN's terrorist activity, whilst at the same time supporting their resistance, but critical support of their resistance, which I think is really interesting if you're talking about today's climate. You cannot, we hear a lot about the Israelis' rights to defend themselves, but we hear very little at times about what is actually written in international law about a people who have oppressed right to resist. And as soon as someone says that, I support the Palestinians' resistance, or I support their right to resist, immediately then they are condemned as supporting everything that Hamas, October 7th, so you support that there. Well, it is possible, surely, to have a nuanced argument and to be able to say, actually, I support resistance, I support their rights to resist, as is written in international law, yet I can still condemn acts like October the 7th and so on. And I think it seems really mainstream media and so on seems to just not allow for any kind of nuanced argument or any kind of analysis.
Yeah. Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think just to make it absolutely clear, my position would be that it is entirely consistent to condemn October the 7th and condemn what has happened in Gaza ever since. I mean, I can't see how you can condemn one without condemning the other. So I don't see that as a contradiction, and I think the whataboutery. I mean, I think we need to get rid of this word "but" when we talk about politics. I condemn this, but it's not. I condemn this and I condemn this, which is much. Back to the film. I think now we've nailed our colours to the flag. Back to the film. One thing that is striking about this film is, yes, there is the telephoto lenses that you talked about. There is the non-professional actors. There is the use of a kind of aping of, not aping is the wrong word, but almost pastiching of news footage. But there's also this idea that from a narrative point of view, the narrative is very differently constructed to how you imagine a narrative is usually constructed in a feature film.
Yes, I mean one of there is ellipses, and one of the things that the film theorist and critic Andrea Bazan loved about Pasolini's films was the ellipses and the fact the lack of character motivation and so on. And I think you kind of get a little bit of that in this. I mean, we see at the beginning of the film's central character. There's not really a central character in the film, but if there is one, it's Ali Lapointe, who's played by a Algerian peasant. One of the things about that Pontecorvo was really strict about in his casting, and he believed firmly, was that acting ability wasn't important. What was really most important was how the character looked and their mannerisms. And he believed even if the actor couldn't act, even if the person they've chosen to play the role couldn't act at all, forgot the lines and so on. Pontecorvo says you can get around that. You just need patience. You couldn't do that in the theatre, but with the right shot and so on, you can just capture someone's expression, and you've got it. And he was really strict about believing in that.
And it was a tendency in Italian cinema to sort of dub everybody anyway, so in that way, that was another way he could get over non-professionals not being able to deliver their lines particularly well. Or the name of the actor who plays Ali Lapointe, I mean, as you say, he's a non-professional. He goes on to have a career after Battles of Algiers. He's called Brahim Hagiag.
I mean, there was only one or two actors in the most important actor is who played Colonel Mathieu, was Jean Martin, who actually was struggling to find work in France at the time because he had signed a petition against French involvement in Algeria, basically anti the Algerian war, basically trying to get the troops out of Algeria, basically. And he was struggling to work, so he was ideal for this. And one of the great things of this film is the fact that we talked about the human cost. It shows you the human cost of the FLN's activities, but it also, and Pontecorvo was quite, and even Yassef, the ex-FLN, the producer, was quite adamant about this as well, that he didn't want to portray the French just as monsters, like typical Nazi monsters that you see in a kind of typical Nazi, all the usual villain stereotypes. He wanted to portray them as being intelligent and articulate, and Jean Martin does this perfectly. He's a really quite an arresting, intelligent, charismatic figure.
He's got some of the best lines as well. I mean, he explains things, and you go with his explanation. Why don't we have any Jean-Paul Sartres? Sartre. Why are the Sartres always on the left? Why don't we have any on the right? We just get Fox News.
Yes, I'd like the Sartre one. What comes to? There's also that great line but it's not from. It's during the interview, but it's from the FLN. One of the FLNs being captured about bread baskets.
Oh yes, you give us your aeroplanes and your bombs, and we'll give you our baskets.
We'll give you our baskets.
Yeah.
Which is actually it's very, very relevant. It's about that. It's about that both sides are committing violence. It's just that one side has the weapons and the military. Actually, it's important as well to point out that I think we're talking about the relevance today, that this film was screened in the Pentagon. Battle of Algiers was screened in the Pentagon leading up to the Iraq War by George W. Bush, I think, because the film is seen as a kind of almost a textbook description of how guerrilla armies operate. And George Bush thought that maybe the military could learn something from watching this film, which beggars the question, what didn't he understand about this film? Because if there's one overriding message, it's that no matter your reasons for invading a country and occupying a country, no matter how more superior you are military-wise, it will end in atrocities, torture, ignominy, and eventually defeat. And so it's a shame that George Bush didn't get the message that this film was actually trying to say.
Yeah, it was like the film in no way implies that there's a third way of doing this, that there's some other way of winning this battle.
No.
What you say about the lack of just clear-cut binary, these are villains, these are the good guys, I think it's exemplified by a shot that almost brings me to tears. And it's such a strange moment to get, mushy about, because it seems like this isn't the sort of film. It is a film that stirs strong emotions. But it's a scene when a bomb goes off at a racetrack, and an Algerian child is selling like cigarettes or popcorn or some. So he's a vendor, and he's turned on by the crowd, and they start beating him, and then it looks, kind of likely they'll beat him to death. And he's rescued by a French policeman, and there is something that even talking about it makes me fill up, because there's just an act of human decency by somebody you're not expecting to be an agent of human decency in an atmosphere of utter hatred, and in which that hatred is kind of understandable. You're seeing them pull out the bodies of young women and young men who are just on a day out and their lives are destroyed. And here's a representative. Here's somebody who could have planted the bomb.
Yeah, and also you see the child's face as well, because as soon as he starts to look and he knows he's terrified, because he realizes that I'm going to pay for this now. Right at this moment, I'm going to pay for it. And even the crowd that attack him admit that you're going to pay for this. We're going to take it out on you, as though you may not be responsible. You may be responsible, and that's. I mean, let's talk a little bit. Let's counter that with these scenes of the Algerian FLN terrorist bombs going off, because that sequence in the cross-cutting between the 3 bombs that are placed in the Air France offices, a milk bar and a cafe, and there was an extraordinary sequence there where the film sound alters. It cuts between diegetic sound in the cafe, and then you get hear the Algerian drumming, and you see a montage of shots of customers in the cafe, and those are cut with shot close-ups of the clock ticking, because you know that there's only 20 minutes or so before the bomb's going off. And there's a number of really close shots, one of a child licking an ice cream, and you're watching this and you're realizing that they're going to be dead very shortly, and then it cuts to the clock again ticking, and then suddenly I noticed there's a sudden flash zoom into the center of the clock, and then you hear the bomb and you see the explosion. And I think it's an extraordinary piece of filmmaking. When I first saw the film in 2006, I remember that year because I support Italy. I'm a big Italian football fan, and that was the year Italy won the World Cup.
There you go.
I watched the film in London screened as part of Marxism political conference, and that coincided on the weekend with Italy playing in the World Cup final. I'd been to see Italy qualify in the Italy end with my younger brother earlier that year, and then I was in London, and on the night I was walking around with thousands of Italians in the West End. But it's quite an emotional moment. But that's how I remember the year. It was also the year that Gillo Pontecorvo was supposed to come and give an introduction and answer a Q&A about the film. But sadly, he was ill, and he died later. He died in the October or November of that year, I think, a few months later. But I remember coming out of the film, and one young student or one young political activist, I don't know, asked me. I didn't know who he was. Just picked on me, I think, and said, "Why is that film so highly rated?" He didn't like it. He says it's just a lot of terrorists killing each other. To which I said something along the lines of, I think if that's all you think that film is, then I don't think you've understood it much at all. So now, kind of 18 years after, I suppose now I'm trying to say all those things that I'd like to say to that student or that young man who didn't like the film all those years ago. I hope he's listening.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, if we get anybody going and digging out this film, I think it's available. I'm not sure if it's available on UK Prime, so it's readily available to screen. Criterion, as you know, have done an excellent transfer of it recently. I think that I don't want it to give the impression as well that this is like just a political film. This is a portrait of a society. This is a portrait of people in extreme circumstances. And as you say, that sequence with the bombs, it could be filmed by Hitchcock, except, in terms of the turning of the tension, and that zoom that you talk about will be very typical of Italian exploitation cinema going on later when you have the giallos and, it becomes a sort of, and you've got to remember, You've got to remember, his cinematographer, whose name I'm going to look up so I don't.
Marcello Gatti.
Oh, perfect. He's Marcello Gatti. He works on like spaghetti westerns before this. He's worked on like big plenum films and genre films. So he's not coming from necessarily just a pure neorealist or highbrow cinema background. He's coming from this kind of thing. So they're putting together these sequences with that in mind. They know how to use the audience, and in a way, those sequences go against that cinema verité thing, because although they look like cinema verité, they're edited in a way which and entirely to build up tension, entirely to have an effect on the audience.
Well, the editing of the film is quite interesting in the sense that Pontecorvo was insistent that the film wasn't edited in the classical continuity style of editing, the shot reverse, shot pattern of field and so on like that. But I mean, of course, there are some sequences where it is. And the first editor, Mario Serendré, edited it that way. So then Mario Mora came to re-edit the film. I think Serendré died. But what's interesting about how that editing is the in-camera editing of a lot of the crowd sequences and so on. And it comes across because of the lightweight cameras. Pontecorvo said you don't need to cut with those sort of cameras from a longer shot, from a medium long shot into a closer shot. You can just move the camera in towards them. And that's where it gets its veritas kind of qualities from, because when in the crowd sequences and so on, and the battles, you see the camera almost responding to the action around it.
Following the tank, following the people falling over. Having
to refocus, move around. I mean, this has been a technique which has been used in direct cinema and observational cinema and documentaries and so on. People like Ken Loach have used this technique in the schoolroom sequence in Kes, when it's almost as though the camera's catching, missing things that someone said, and then trying to catch up to the action. Do you see what I mean? That's what's happening in this film. But you're right, there's those sequences which are totally skillfully edited. The bomb sequences. It's replicated in the milk bar, the bomb that goes off in the milk bar just afterwards. Is absolutely incredibly tense, almost a thriller. And in fact, actually, what is this film? It's a drama. You said we don't want to talk about it just as don't want to give the impression that it's just a political film. Well, you're right, because it's a drama documentary. It's got political elements of third cinema and so on, and post-colonial cinema, but at the same time, it's you could just watch it on the basis of it being an action political thriller.
Yeah, I'm kind of responding as well to the guy walking out of the screening and saying, well, it's just terrorists blowing each other up. I mean, it's almost as if that person, in a sense, maybe wanted more politics in it, or wasn't sort of. But there seems to be such a variety in it. There are those thriller elements. There is it does very complicated things with time as well. You start the film at the very beginning. The first shot you see is in a torture chamber, post the torture. So you see the aftermath of torture, which has got the information. Torture has worked. Then you get a little bit of bark. And then which tells you what we're watching is actually a tragedy, and why are we hearing this sort of very European Christian music in the midst of North Africa, a North African torture room? It's a bit of colonial perspective for you right there. And then you get this Ennio Morricone score, which Pontecorvo collaborated with him on, of this amazing, amazing percussive sort of dum 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 dum.
I think what's interesting about there is two really percussive elements to the score. There's the percussion of I mentioned earlier, what's based on beggar percussion music from Algeria, street kind of music. And then you've got the percussion score of the military. So it's almost as though the conflict on the screen, the action is kind of reflected also in Morricone's score. And then
I never thought of that. It's brilliant. Yeah,
you get that conflict between the two in the score as well as what we see, as well as in the narrative. And then there is also the kind of the Gregorian, I think, that's been described as choral music in the torture sequences. And that's not an attempt at verité either, is it? To put that music in, the non-diegetic sound. It's a stylish flourish. It's a stylized touch. And then you've got the Ali's theme, which is kind of which now. When Pontecorvo was working with Morricone, for weeks they couldn't see eye to eye. Everything that Morricone suggested, Pontecorvo didn't like. Everything that Pontecorvo suggested, Morricone didn't like. And then really early one morning, Pontecorvo got this idea for a melody which would become Ali's theme. And he was so excited, and he didn't trust himself to play it to Morricone. He recorded it on a tape, and then he rang Morricone and says, when can I come round? I've got an idea for a melody. And Morricone says, as soon as you can, as soon as you can. So early morning, he took up. Now, Pontecorvo tells this story, and Morricone lived on the top apartment of a block, of an apartment block. And he was so excited, was Pontecorvo, that he raced up the stairs whistling this theme to himself. And then he arrived at Morricone's apartment. And Morricone says to him, okay, so you've got an idea, but I've got an idea for a song as well. I've been up for some music in the film. And he sat at his piano and proceeded to play exactly the same theme that Pontecorvo had written back at his apartment earlier on. And Pontecorvo couldn't believe this. He says, I can't believe it. That's my theme. That's my music. Morricone brushed this off, saying, we've been working together for weeks. Of course, our ideas will rub off on each other. And Pontecorvo says, no, you don't understand. It's exactly the same notes. And they got Morricone, his wife, she said, yes, it's the same melody, exactly. And for a while, Pontecorvo couldn't accept this. He thought, this is uncanny. This can't happen. Until when the film won the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival, Morricone took Pontecorvo aside and said, of course I didn't write that melody. I heard you whistling it as you was coming up the stairs, and I got to my piano really quickly to do it. And I told my wife I would only let on to the trick I've been playing on you if we won the Golden Lion at Venice. So that's when he told Pontecorvo.
Oh, brilliant!
Been playing on it.
What a fiendish sense of humor Morricone has. He's someone so I love Morricone. He's a figure who goes through a lot of Italian cinema, obviously, but cinema generally.
One of the old-time great film composers, and I think this was made before he kind of made his name. Am I right in saying this film, or was he on his way at this point?
Yeah, 66 is about when he's already scoring films and has been scoring them for a few years, but he hasn't absolutely. He's certainly not got an international fame yet,
right?
Because he hasn't. All his spaghetti westerns would only come out in America in about 67, 68, I think.
Yeah, so around this period, he was starting to be.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those films that I always think I'm not going to listen to the soundtrack to this because there's not that much music in it, because you think it's such a documentary, and then you rewatch it and go, there's music all the way through this. This hasn't sort of got that documentary thing of no music at all, and we'll just have it as a documentary.
The design sound as well. I mean, I'm thinking of the ululations of the Algerian women, which sounds menacing and it brilliantly done. And even as I said, the bomb sequences where you move from the sound of the cafe, the diegetic sound of the cafe, to the drumming and so on. And I thought for years, when that clock, you hear the ticking of the clock. But actually, I don't think you do. If you do, it's very quiet. I thought it suddenly cut to the sound of the ticking, but it isn't. It's just that you feel like you're hearing that ticking of the clock because it's so powerful and so disturbing and so suspenseful. Yeah,
it's so ingrained. And I think they do that Hitchcock thing as well. Hitchcock always has that thing. I think he did it in Marnie, of making you sympathize with the thief because you've got a certain intimacy with them, and so you will follow them. So the same thing's true of the people planting the bomb. When the old lady says, I don't really look European, do I? I'm not going to be able to do it. Don't worry, I'll take a child along and that'll probably do it. And you sort of like, oh yeah, thank God she'll be able to do it now. And it's like, wait a minute, who am I who am I backing here? What am I involved with? And this film makes you empathize with terrorists, and it makes you empathize with torturers, because you can see the other point of view as well. When they have the barbecue, this is the police chief who feels his hands are tied by legality, and him and his pals take a night trip into the Casbah to just murder some people, leave the wives behind, you're kind of understanding where they're coming from, even as you deplore their activities.
I want to mention this idea of what sort of film it is as well, and the power of the film. Pauline Kael's really loved the film, and she said that she commended the film of its emotional power, the emotional power of the film. And she said that Pontecorvo, she called Pontecorvo was one of the most dangerous types of Marxists. He was a Marxist poet. And I think that's right. I think there's poetry. It's not just let's capture real life, and it's staged to such an extent. It just, as I said before, it makes it look, there's an illusion of like you're actually just watching events as they happen. But there's also some other incredible poetical moments in the film. The ending, for instance, is really emotional. I think I don't think this is a spoiler, because we all know that Algeria got their independence a little bit, a few years, 50, when did Algeria get their independence in the end? 56, wasn't it? Was it?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, so 10 years before the film was actually made, released. But the ending, when you see the
62, actually, 1954 to 1962, according to Wikipedia.
You see, if Italy had won a World Cup in that year, I'd have remembered it correctly.
Are you sure they didn't? Because they have won a few.
Yes, yeah. I think the others I think most of the others coincided with the fascist era, I think.
Right.
Honestly, I think they won two. I tend not to count those two.
Fair enough. And of course, the Venice Film Festival was created by fascists, so we don't want to.
Yes,
we don't want to forget that.
So was the Cinecittà Studios, wasn't
right.
they?
Right. Yeah, Mussolini-esque architecture of the time. Sorry, I interrupted your point, I think.
It ends on a real moment of hope, I think, for free. If you've imbibed in this kind of this revolutionary fervour of the film, and this idea that independence is a good thing, and resistance towards colonial oppression is worthy, then the film ends on a real emotionally powerful moment. But as it happens, when the film went into production, when it was filming in Algiers, it was about a month or so after the military coup, it's almost like that John Pilger saying, "We'll have freedom next time." It's one of when the people's desire for democratic freedom and liberty is kind of like put on the shelf for a little while. John Pilger wrote a book about that subject called Freedom Next Time, but we'll have to wait.
Yeah. I mean, I think the film ending, so what you have is, from the very beginning, Ali Pointe and his Confederates are holed up in a priest hole, hiding place, and the army have surrounded it because they know where he is because of the torture that they've committed, which has worked, Torture in this film is shown to be very effective in militarily defeating a terrorist organization. And they are outside, and they're sort of giving him the last chance to give up and potentially face trial or to just die a martyr's death. And we've seen that happen. We've seen it happen previously in a film where another leader has got to that point and gone, you know what? I don't think I want to die. It's useless sacrificing myself like this. So has handed himself over. So that's possible. That's a possibility, and even politically it might make more sense. You get a public trial, you get to speak a bit more, you become. Ali Pointe is like very fanatical, and he's not going to do that. And the child with him, there's a woman with him, there's another Confederate with him, and the police blow it up, and everybody is crying outside, and the population is, and the military walk away with this kind of very hubristic, Pyrrhic victory, where they're saying, it's over now. We've got peace. And the funny thing is, I like this country, and they like us, and everything should be fine now. And so you think, what idiots? And then it says, a few years later, there's this huge demonstration. But the interesting thing about the huge demonstrations, which bring about the independence and the decolonization of Algeria, is that it's not. The terrorists don't win via their methods. It's a huge popular uprising, not a sort of Leninist vanguard of cell-like, And so again, it's sort of like the question is open: do the terrorists inspire that national uprising, or did the terrorists actually take everyone down a cul-de-sac? In other words. To compare it to today's situation, Hamas has hurt the Palestinian cause more than it's helped the Palestinian cause. If we're looking at it from a similar perspective as the Battle of Algiers,
I would agree. I would say that in a sense, really, I think Hamas and the Israelis need each other. Justify their own actions.
Yeah, like the Paras and the FLN in the film.
Now, the thing that you've just mentioned about the what? Sorry, I've just missed the point. I was going to mention. So I forget. What is it you've just said? Because
the huge demonstrations at the end.
The line in the film. There's a line in the film which says that one of the FLN fighters says, one of the leaders says, we won't win just through atrocities. Just for outrages. We need the people. And you're right, at the end of the film, it's kind of almost seen, it's almost not FLN led at all. The FLN don't know a great deal about where these demonstrations suddenly occur. The film tells you. It just seems to be a sporadic kind of uprising that's not planned at all, not orchestrated at all, just occurring. But it's an extraordinary sequence of filming that. I mean, some of those are pure Eisenstein as well. You see the Eisenstein elements. In fact,
there's even the steps at some point as well.
Pontecorvo said that for him, the ideal film director is 3 parts Rossellini, 1 part Eisenstein. And you see, we've talked about the location shooting, use of non-actors and so on, and all the 3 parts Rossellini. Some of those crowd scenes are pure Eisenstein. And in fact, the scenes when the Jews get off the train in Pontecorvo's previous film, pure Eisenstein as well. This is some Eisenstein elements in there. And I would put Eisenstein's ideas of montage in amongst Italian neorealism as one of those things that have influenced cinema that I mentioned earlier on. That's every time there's a kind of movement comes along that changes the way we look at films and changes the way that films are made. And I would put some of Einstein's ideas around montage and so on in with Italian neorealism as 2 of those great movements, which, in fact, actually, the Italian cinema has had a hugely influential, not just Italian neorealism. I was thinking about this the other day in terms of Gialli.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a huge horror fan, and you cannot watch a horror film now without seeing references to Dario Argento, yes, Mario Bava, and so on. Even, I know there was a podcast from it which I really enjoyed on this Italian Cinema Italia podcast on Salo. But to me, Salo is a horror film. It's a kind of, to me, it's the best torture horror. It's an elevated torture horror, they'd call it today if it was released today, I think. And also Spaghetti Western, as you mentioned, a huge influence on how the Western changed and on the modern Western. So Italy, it's not just all about neorealism, what the influence that Italian cinema has had on world cinema. I mean, that's the big one, I suppose, but there's also these other little pockets of influence that they've had.
Yeah, I mean, you could even go right back to Cabiria and silent cinema having this. I mean, before the war, silent cinema was the center of the cinematic universe. You could argue was more Paris and Rome than it was Hollywood. It was they were more equal partners, and Berlin, of course. And then post-war, that shifted much more towards Hollywood, and much more towards Hollywood. Now it's shifting again. Now we're getting other centers. We're getting things like Bollywood coming into to a more global prominence.
Yes. Yeah. Go on. I was just allowing that
to let that sink in.
Let that sink in.
I'm not sure how that will work, but so to leave Pontecorvo's Battle of Algiers, I think the last sort of question we should have, which is an extension of what we're just talking about, really, is kind of like its lasting influence. And I mean, there are lots of people who are on record stating that this film has been hugely influential. I think you can see Stanley Kubrick was hugely influenced by it, and I think you can see bits of Full Metal Jacket being, having moments of Pontecorvo. Pontecorvo himself, went on to make Burn, which was a very troubled production with Marlon Brando, but I think is a fascinating film. It's really worth watching.
I do. I've watched it again recently, and I think it's again, as you said earlier, the Battle of Algiers has set the bar that high that everything else is going to, it's not as good. I had a little problem with Ben in terms of, I think one of the strengths of Battle of Algiers is its narrative precision. And I think Ben was a little bit flabbier. The narrative was a little flabbier. Could have done with trimming a little. But of course, there was a lot of trouble between. And Brando's brilliant in the film, incidentally. I think Brando's superb. And there was, but he did have a very fractious relationship, I think, with the filmmakers. As you expect, Marlon Brando was renowned for being a little bit it's incidentally, he had a very good, interesting views, but Marlon Brando on colonialism and so on. You think about his support for the Native American argument and things like that. So it's a natural joining together, I think, with Pontecorvo.
Yeah, I think his contradiction is always that he wants to engage in difficult films, but he doesn't necessarily want to play the roles that are available to him in those films. In other words, he's the slave trader, and he can't help but bring, with his actor's vanity, bring Brando's charisma to the role, and that's a real difficult point to make.
And he doesn't want to surrender to the director on any particular level, does he? I want to play this way, and Pontecorvo wasn't having that. I think he says no, because especially with the idea of views of realism, he didn't want to muddy the script and the ideas he had for the film, and Brando was wanting to play it a different way at times.
I think another filmmaker sort of coming up to sort of more present day, and it's someone who I was thinking of when we were talking about there being a bigger world outside of what the camera is showing, so the camera's trying to catch up. And this might strike some as coming out of left field, but someone like Paul Greengrass, who obviously is well known for the Bourne films, but really cut his teeth on things like Bloody Sunday, in which he filmed historical events as a period film, but he's filming them as if he's filming a documentary. And like Battle of Algiers, Bloody Sunday, which I think is a little bit of a forgotten film, which I think it was James Nesbitt, I think, is the most recognizable actor in it.
It's been a while since I saw it years ago, quite a while ago.
Yeah, you sort of have the soldiers as actual characters who are, three-dimensional human beings, and you have the people who are in the demonstration and the people who are the IRA who are using the demonstration to some degree, and so it's a very complicated thing. And then of course he takes that shaky camera thing and he uses it for Bourne, and he uses it for other less, not less films, but more generic films, let's say. Soderbergh as well has been on record saying he's hugely influenced by.
Can I put in something that's really out there? Star Wars, George Lucas. Star Wars is I think when the troops arrive with Matthew at the front. This was just the stormtroopers in Star Wars with Darth Vader at the front, and it's a film about. It's a film. Star Wars is a film about resistance and
Reds. The Reds are resisting the Empire.
And also you see terrorist atrocities in the film. The blowing up of the Death Star at the end. No one talks about those innocent people killed on the Death Star, do they? It's all justified, but the cleaners and the cooks and so on. So Star Wars. I'll put Star Wars there or something.
Yeah, it's also got that tit for tat violence, hasn't it? You blow up my planet, I blow up your planet.
Well, it's true. Joking aside, Lucas was influenced by. I mean, the Searchers gets into the film. He also, when Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will is in Star Wars somewhere, according to Lucas himself.
I mean, Lucas, I think, is a great technician, and he has that idea of. You'll see it in THX 1138 as well, and a lot of his.
Best film.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Although I haven't rewatched American Graffiti in an age, and that right. I think I've only ever seen it once. So that's one I really want to revisit, because I think that's before he becomes George Lucas, the Star Wars guy. But even I remember listening to him doing a commentary track on Attack of the Clones, and he was talking about some shot at the very beginning where he moves the camera to catch a character. And he says, "Oh, that's that. I want it to look like a documentary made in space."
Right.
And it's like, it hasn't really. You haven't necessarily done that. All the CGI doesn't really help that. But I understand how that's influencing his framing and his camera movement.
Well, it was part of New Hollywood, and I did say that at the beginning that New Hollywood was influenced by Italian neorealism was one of the things that affected, and in combination with the Nouvelle Vague, was the things that made those Scorsese and so on want to make films and artistic films that had moved on from the golden age of Hollywood and had these continental world influences.
Yeah, and it was, of course, it was possible to walk down the street in New York and go into a cinema and watch some of the best foreign films that were being made at the time, and the great years of Fellini and Bergman and people like that.
Yeah.
So Lee, the last question I want to ask is for a recommendation for a sort of an Italian film you think people should go out that maybe they don't necessarily, maybe it's not La Dolce Vita but a film that is a particular favorite of yours that you think people should see.
There's one that isn't often mentioned. I'll mention two. Suspiria. If no one likes horror, no one's seen Dario Argento's Suspiria. Watch Suspiria and see how it's influenced horror films.
What did you think of the remake? What did you think of the Guadagnino?
I liked it up to a point. I didn't like this political subplot, which seemed to be not connected. They kept mentioning it all the time, and it didn't seem to, and I was thinking, okay then, so when's this going to connect with the rest of the narrative? And it just didn't connect at all for me. I thought it looked great. I like what they did at the end, how they altered the ending. Not giving it away. But I didn't like that. Rather clumsily, I thought, linked this which didn't connect. And I thought they might as well just have cut that out. And I kind of got a bit, oh yes, they're mentioning the terrorist bombs now, but I cannot see how it's connecting. It seems to have been put in as an afterthought rather than with any real conviction. That was my problem with the film. But I like the ending, and I thought it looked brilliant. Oh,
by the way, we just to bring it back very quickly to Battle of Algiers, we mentioned the Pentagon showing it as a film before the Iraq War. Also, it was one of the favorite films of one of the Baader-Meinhof gang, and it was accused of being like a textbook for terrorists. That terrorists were watching it as either a recruiting device, but also a sort of how-to, which makes you think, I mean, if that's, what, plant bombs, is that the thing you've learned? Is that it's not much of a textbook if that's your textbook. But
it was banned as well in France. We haven't mentioned that as well for a year, and then it wasn't screened for another 4 years because of terrorist threats against threats of bomb threats at cinemas that were showing it because of its pro-terrorist, pro-Algerian, anti-French. That some French nationalist types thought, oh well, we don't like this depiction of terrorism in this film, so we're going to threaten our own terrorism to counter that. Which, go figure. That makes sense, doesn't it? We don't like depictions of terrorism, so we're going to bomb you.
Yeah, we hate them so much. Yeah, it's like, we're pro-life and we're going to kill anybody who isn't. Who's consistent now? Anyway, the also, by the way, when it was re-released, I think in 2006 there was a re-release. One of the few sort of publications that didn't sort of give it a good review was Cahiers, the historical sort of magazine of French cineasts, were very down on it. But Cahiers has always had quite a strong right-wing slant, so it was almost like putting their flag in the ground of like, where Pustif loves it, so we're going to hate it.
Yes, I'll say So kind of like the opposition between the colonialists and the
FLN.
The FLN. You've got that. Yeah, you have a withers over gangsters sort of argument on a critical on a cinematic critical level. It's like George Bush saying you have a withers over gangsters, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry. Yes,
the
second
film I
film.
quite liked, which isn't technically, I suppose it's direct. I believe it's directed. I haven't seen this for years. I really love Il Postino. I just think because it combines three things I really like: Italy, poetry, and left-wing politics all together, and quite a beautiful, gentle film, and very enjoyable. Not one of the greatest films ever made, but I think a really lovely film to watch and emotional movie.
And a wonderful performance by Troisi, who died
just after the film was
exactly. He was actually suffering from cancer during the film.
It was his dream to make this film as well, wasn't it?
Yeah. Massimo Troisi, if you've not seen him in anything, he's well worth. He's a brilliant actor, beautiful actor, very sort of soft, comic actor, generally speaking. His films with Roberto Benigni are well worth. He does a time travel one called Non ci resta ma piangere.
I'm sure I've seen him in one or two things, but it's so long ago, I can't remember now. But it's a face maybe it's because I've seen Postino so often.
Yeah,
I think it's a beautiful film.
If you've never seen that, it's really worth it. They go back to it's just like two ordinary guys who accidentally find themselves in the Middle Ages, and he pretends to sing Yesterday to one of but he can't. He says, "Oh, I know a song," and he starts singing Yesterday, but he doesn't have all the lyrics, and he's like, da, 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 da. It's just brilliant. It's actually the joke that the whole of Yesterday is based on, but he does it much better and he does it much quicker.
And I'm looking forward to seeing La Chiara, is it? This new Italian film, which has just been released. It came in the Sight and Sound top 50 films of the year, which I'm looking at.
Which one's this? A Chiara?
Yes.
That's that's coming in. That's it's the I should know the name of the director because I met him. He's made like 4 films, I think, or this is
quite interesting. Kind of.
Yeah, he's got Jonas. That's it. Jonas Carpignano. These are films all set in Calabria. Yeah. A Chambra was the first one in 2017, and A Chiara is the more recent one. It actually was released in 2021 in Italy. I think it's just got to England. Wow. But it's it's all of his films are based in these sort of groups of marginalized people in the poorest part of Italy, which is Calabria, right down by the south of Naples, basically. Yeah. That will be is well worth watching. It's a really good film.
I'll be to see this year. But
yeah, and he's a real voice that's continuing. If you want to say, where did neorealism go? Well, there are people out there who are still doing it, and you see them more on the festival circuit than you do in the multiplex, sadly. but you can root them out, and there are streaming services that make these films very readily available.
And as Sabatini said, for Sabatini, the important thing about neorealism was ordinary people and the ordinariness of their lives, the dailiness of their lives, which doesn't apply to Battle of Algiers, actually, because these are ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, or Rossellini's three neorealist films to an extent. But Sabatini stressed it was ordinary people without embellishment, without artifice, ordinary people showing them doing ordinary things, which straight away made me think of Jean Dielman, actually, which is exactly that. So, suddenly, and suddenly the ordinariness of their existence can suddenly have great moments of suspense. Oh, she's dropped a spoon.
Yeah. But yeah, that film does. I wonder about that film. I'm a little bit on the fence with it, because it seems to sort of, if that's what it was, if that's where it went, but it seems to end with, it just seems to collapse into melodrama in the end, because it has that, you know, why watch this woman for all this time if she's not going to murder somebody? You know, that's it, you know.
It's actually incredible, brave. It's a brave film, incredibly brave film to actually stick to that. I found it incredibly monotonous and also hypnotically compelling as well at the same time. It kind of drove me in, and I thought the ending was really powerful. But I think you needed to have some sort of melodrama at the end of the film. I don't think you can, as Sabatini said, just watch that plane going over the sky once and then again at 20 times, almost forever. I think you've got to add some drama and embellishment at some point for us to watch.
Yeah. Ultimately, it's a self-defeat. The self-defeating thing of drama is ultimately we need the lie that something's gonna happen, and there will be a beginning and a middle and an end, and it will be, you know,
not necessarily in that order.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, listen, Lee, it's been an absolute joy to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a lot more fun than a discussion of Battle of Algiers should be, maybe. But thanks for your thoughts.
Yeah, it's not a comedy, is it? There's quite a bit of comedy in Rome Open City, I think. You know, but yes, but thanks for having me, John. It's been a pleasure to come on. I love your podcast, actually, on Italian cinema. I've got to catch up with a couple more that I haven't seen yet, but I think it's wonderful.
Brilliant.
So thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
Arrivederci ragazzi, ci vediamo in un prossimo film.
Lo speriamo.